Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us on this webinar around speaker program for fraud alert from Department of Justice that came out in Q4 last year in November. And I'm very excited with our esteemed panelists today to walk you through what it contains and what actions you can take. The goal for this webinar today will be to give you some key takeaways that you can go take and go and implement back into your programs at your respective companies. So just by way of a quick introduction, so the webinar is going to be, I'm going to be the moderator, and I'm joined by Sarah DeFrancisca, who's a partner at Dinsmore and Scholl, and Leslie Restagno, who's the Chief Compliance Officer at Amneal Pharma. Just giving you a quick introduction about themselves. So Sarah is a partner at Dinsmore, and she spent I guess a couple of decades now in the life sciences space with working with pharma device companies around compliance, regulatory, government investigations, FCA, anti-kickback. And I've known Sarah for quite some time now, so welcome, Sarah, and thank you for being on the panel today. Okay, I'll keep moving. And also with us today is Leslie Restagno. She's Chief Compliance Officer at Amneal Pharma, and I've known Leslie now for a couple of years as well. Very long history in compliance in pharmaceutical and healthcare law, food and drug, and she's going to be sharing with us today how at Amneal what actions they've taken around this fraud alert and what we can learn from the actions at Amneal. And just quickly, myself, Mohammed Awais, I'm founder and CEO at Core Data, and we work with 30+ life sciences companies around their needs for compliance solutions. And prior to Core Data, I spent about a decade building data and analytical applications for Fortune 1000 companies. So very pleased to be welcoming you on. The format for this webinar is going to be, we're going to go through a few sections of the alerts, and then we'll also poll the audience around how you're looking at some of these things, and Sarah and Leslie will tag team to give you some insights and also some recommendations and analyze your responses as well. I'll jump in when the polls come in, and this will be a recorded session, so we'll make available the video and the presentation slides, so you don't have to take notes if you don't want to, and that will be available in your inboxes. So with that, I'd like to transition over to Sarah, and Sarah, I'll make you the presenter here real quick. Okay, you should have the presentation now, Sarah.
Yep. Okay.
Okay, I can see your screen. You want to go full screen?
Yeah, I'm just trying to get to it.
And while we get that set up, audience, if you have any questions, you can ask them through the chat window or the questions box on your GoToMeeting panel, and I'll be able to moderate them as we go through this content today.
Is that in screen sharing mode?
No, it's right now not in screen sharing mode, Sarah.
Yeah, it's not. Flipping over.
Do you see the presentation mode on your screen? Or you may have to reshare. Okay.
Yeah, on my screen it is in presentation mode. I don't know why it's not flipping over to presentation mode on the screen.
When you if you go to the GoToMeeting panel window, under the play button there should be a drop down that allows you to pick a screen or a PowerPoint, and if you pick a screen, then it's going to show you that
Did you get it?
This is good, but just do me a favor. In the display settings that you see on top right here, just
Yep.
say flip, I guess. Yep, swap. Yep, swap presenter, and that should.
Did that do it?
No, I didn't swap it on my end. I'm still seeing the big slide and the small slide. So still in the presenter mode. Oh. If it's easier, then I can run the slides if that makes sense for you.
It's probably because I can't even access like.
Okay, why don't I do that? Hold on, just quickly. I will take back presentation right and just let me know when you want me to flip over to the next slides. And I'm going to. Okay, are you able to see my screen?
Yeah, thank you. Okay, so sorry for the technical difficulties. Thanks for joining today. We are talking about the OIG special fraud alert. And I think, Mohammed, we lost the slide.
Okay, so something's happening on my end as well.
Yeah.
Okay, because I was trying to. This is. Okay, hopefully this should work. Let me know.
Looks good on my end.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay. So we're here today to talk about the OIG special fraud alert that was issued in November by the Office of Inspector General. Special fraud alerts are interesting. They're kind of reserved by the OIG for the most pressing matters that the OIG is seeing. So, they're different than their normal bulletins or compliance guidances. They are kind of, the highest level of guidance that the OIG offers, and they don't issue them very frequently. It's several years typically between fraud alerts, but these are kind of the most pressing issues that the OIG is seeing and wants to alert the industry to. So this particular fraud alert focuses on speaker programs conducted by pharmaceutical and medical device companies. And kind of the key takeaway or the focus of the special fraud alert is expressing skepticism about the educational value of speaker programs. It's talking about whether these are conducted or kind of the most efficient or most effective way to educate healthcare professionals, or whether there are other or better alternatives that don't involve remuneration in various forms that the OIG is currently seeing with regard to speaker programs. So if we want to flip to the next slide, let's start off by asking, an audience question. So how would you describe your company's response to the OIG special fraud alert so far? So A is, your company has viewed it as critically important and significant attention or resources have been dedicated to it so far, in the last 60 days. Option B is, there's been some attention given to it, but it's, not the highest priority item right now. C is that you're aware of the fraud alert, but the company really has not dedicated a lot of attention or resources to it at this point. And option D is what fraud alert? I'm here to learn about it. I'm not familiar with it. So if you can flip over to the poll and answer those questions.
And in the meantime, Sarah, why don't I jump in, kick this off by letting you know how Amneal's been responding to it. So we do see a lot of value in having speaker programs. So with that being said, what we've done is we've taken a critical look at our process and everything that goes into our speaker programs to make sure that what we're doing is in line with the fraud alert itself. We'll dig a little bit deeper into what we're specifically looking at as we go through this presentation, but that's what our response has been right now. We'd love to hear from all of our attendees as to what they're seeing and what they're doing in their organizations.
Okay, I think we have a good number of folks have voted, so I'm going to close out the poll so we can see the results. I did just close it out, and let's just share the results.
Okay, so it looks like 72% have viewed it as critically important and are dedicating significant attention to it. 16% some attention to it, but not a high priority right now. 9% aware of it, that's good, and 3% what fraud alert? I get ya. So welcome. Leslie, anything surprising about the results?
No, not at all. I think this is right on target with the conversations that I've had with my colleagues throughout the field. I think a lot of folks, more than half of people understand it's out there, understand it's important, and that it requires attention. And then, everybody else sort of falls in the continuum of trying to figure out what attention and what they're doing. And, one of the things too that I think is really challenging to us as compliance professionals is that, this in and of itself is a critical hard stop for a lot of commercial organizations. Commercial teams, everywhere that everybody I've talked to in my own experience, commercial teams really find a lot of value in relationships, in speaker programs, in imparting significant information about a product via a speaker program. So it's really, I think, going to be a challenge for those organizations that decide that the compliance risk is too high, that they really don't want to have speaker programs. I think they're really going to come up against a lot with their commercial teams. I'd be curious to hear if other people have that same experience. And Sarah, what your thoughts are with respect to that.
Yeah, and I agree with you. I think this polling is exactly right. Nothing too surprising here. A lot of people reaching out, talking to colleagues, talking to counsel about, what do we do with this special fraud alert? Respecting that it is a special fraud alert and deserves significant attention. But respecting that there are other things going on right now, transparency reporting coming up, people paying attention to or dealing with COVID issues. So, I think this is exactly in line with what I was kind of expecting to see. Okay, so if we flip to the next slide, we can take a step back from the special fraud alert, talk about how do we get here? Why are we here at this point that we have a special fraud alert being issued at the end of 2020? Back in 2002, so 19 years ago, we had the first pharma code that was introduced. And there's obviously been several iterations of the pharma code since then. The code has expanded to include new requirements and thoughts on speaker programs. But that initial version back in 2002 talked about speaker programs and said we have to respect that there is remuneration involved and we should have some compliance considerations around them, things like contracts and fair market value, all of the things that we have become ingrained in us with regard to speakers. Then in 2003, we had the OIG compliance guidance for pharmaceutical manufacturers. And in the special fraud alert, the OIG actually cites this particular provision from the OIG guidance, talking about travel, meals, and other benefits provided in connection with marketing programs and how those can potentially implicate the anti-kickback statute. I think the other kind of piece in the timeline to talk about or to note is the passage of the Physician Payments Sunshine Act as part of the Affordable Care Act back in 2010. And this was obviously implemented by CMS in 2013 as the Open Payments Program. And the fraud alert talks about the fact that pharmaceutical and device companies have paid nearly $2 billion to healthcare professionals for speaker-related services between 2017 and 2019. So obviously that's a very big number, and so for that reason, the OIG listed as one reason that they are focusing on speaker programs in this alert. So Mohammed, if you want to flip to the next slide, we have another audience polling question that we can go ahead and launch. So in your opinion, what impact did the Physician Payment Sunshine Act and similar state transparency laws play in leading to this fraud alert from the OIG? So A is significant, B is some impact, C is little impact, and D is no impact at all. Leslie, while everyone's filling that out, any thoughts on this one? How do you view Sunshine Act in the grand scheme of this special fraud alert?
So thanks, Sarah. So in my opinion, the special fraud alert is really a natural progression from the Sunshine Act. Sunshine Act was really enacted to, put some transparency around the payments that are given by, the life sciences industry or pharmaceutical companies to HCPs. And then the special fraud alert actually talks about the nature of those payments. Are those payments, above board? Are they the correct kind of payments? Actually, quite candidly, I think that, it should have been reversed, but that's not the way that things happen in the world, that they should have put some guidance first with the speaker, the special fraud alert around what the issues are so that companies knew what OIG would be looking at with respect to speaker programs, followed by the Sunshine Act, which then reported the transparency. But that's just my humble opinion on that. I'd love to hear, the audience's feedback. Sarah, your feedback on your thoughts on this. Yeah.
So if anyone has thoughts on any of the topics that we're talking about, feel free to enter it into the chat box. Here, 68% of you are saying significant impact, 26% saying some impact, and 6% saying little impact. I'm with you, Leslie. In an ideal world, the special fraud alert, your guidance on speaker programs, more detailed guidance on speaker programs would have been first. But I do think that there has been a pretty significant impact for the Physician Payment Sunshine Act or open payments that has led to the special fraud alert. In the good old days, a company would get a subpoena or a CIA, and there would be requests for information about speaker programs, and they'd be, kind of more high level, like, how much did you pay for speaker programs, kind of details about speaker programs, but a bigger, broader view of them. But now that we have open payments and everybody can see it, including government enforcers and whistleblowers, it's made them smarter. So the subpoenas and the CIAs that we get now are much more in the weeds, asking, directly for, give me the speaker contracts, give us, emails and communications with healthcare professionals about speaker programs. Right from the onset, they're diving deeper into speaker programs. So for that reason, I think the Sunshine Act has, kind of given everyone, government enforcers and whistleblowers, a broad view of speaker programs, and allowed them to do analysis and really focus on the amount of speaker programs being conducted in the industry. Okay, so I think the other reason that we're here, and this is referenced in the special fraud alert, is that the OIG and the DOJ have become smarter and more educated about speaker programs and the risks associated with speaker programs based on all of the False Claims Act settlements that we have seen in the industry. In those, there's various allegations that the speaker programs, one purpose of them was to induce prescriptions in violation of the anti-kickback statute. And this is kind of a timeline. It is by no means intended to show all speaker program settlements. It just shows kind of the development of speaker program settlements, kind of the more significant settlements targeting speaker programs. There's plenty of other settlements that reference speaker programs or have allegations, but these are ones that are largely focused on speaker programs. So if we want to flip to the next slide, The OIG in the special fraud alert talks about these cases, these allegations in these cases have led to, in part, this special fraud alert. And they're talking about some of the allegations that they've seen in these cases that are concerning to them. So they reference things like selecting high prescribing healthcare professionals to be speakers for companies for these events. Another kind of allegation that we've seen in these cases that the OIG references is conditioning speaker remuneration on sales targets. And this comes up in a number of ways. The OIG references requiring speakers to write a minimum number of prescriptions. Some of the cases have allegations related to putting pressure on speakers to prescribe more or to increase their prescription writing in order to get programs or to remain a speaker for the company. We also have seen headlines in national news media about speaker programs at inappropriate venues and allegations of this in other cases, things like hosting it at a winery or a strip club. So these, again, are allegations the OIG has expressed concern about or noted in the fraud alert. Of course, holding programs at high-end restaurants with expensive meals and alcohol. Some of the cases in the OIG fraud alert talks about, dinners that are $500 per person. And, I think the industry largely gets $500 dinners are a program. But, to be fair, we also have cases where the OIG is expressed, or the DOJ is expressing concern about even, $150 dinners. So, what constitutes expensive? Still a area of debate in the industry, but allegations related to this that the OIG has flagged. And then the last two, I kind of bucket together. They all are in the category of inappropriate attendees. So one iteration of this is healthcare professionals who attend the same program multiple times. And the question there from the DOJ is, why does a healthcare professional need to attend the same program multiple times, hear the same content multiple times? Is it true educational value, or, after the first or, one or two times of hearing it, are the third, fourth, and fifth time that they attend for some other purpose, like enjoying a steak dinner? We also have seen allegations in cases of things like a paid speaker for the company who then subsequently attends as an attendee. So if they're a paid speaker for the company, why do they need to attend the program? Is it true education, or are they there for the steak dinner? And then kind of the third bucket that the OIG references is family members, friends, spouses, even office staff that don't have a legitimate business reason to be present at an educational event. And so it really calls into question, well, what is the purpose of them being there? So if we want to flip to the next slide, I think, all of this is summed up by saying that, again, the OIG is skeptical about the educational value of the programs. And it really focuses on the remuneration associated with these programs. Education is one thing, but what is the purpose of the remuneration behind it? Is there a bona fide purpose, or is it problematic? And it talks about not only the remuneration to the speaker, the person, the honoraria paid for them to speak at the event, but also really emphasizes it also includes the meals and the alcohol provided to attendees. So I think, speakers have always been the focus area from a compliance perspective. We get that remuneration can potentially implicate the anti-kickback statute, but the OIG in the special fraud alert goes further and says, it's also those transfers of value, the meals that are provided. The OIG cites studies in support of its position that healthcare professionals are more likely to prescribe a product when they receive remuneration from a company. There are other studies out there that question the influence of remuneration, which, are not referenced by the OIG, but, they do focus on some studies that do draw a correlation. And then to be fair, the OIG does recognize that there is an intent element under the anti-kickback statute that, if there is a case, they do have to prove intent, but then they go on in the special fraud alert to list criteria or circumstances that could suggest an inappropriate intent under the anti-kickback statute. So we want to flip.
And that has come up is, sorry to disrupt your flow, but I guess the audience member has asked, weren't many of these, if not all of these issues already known as prohibitions? Are these really new? I guess what they're asking is why now, right? Why? I mean,
yeah.
A lot of us have known a lot of this for a while.
Yeah, I think that is a very fair question. In 2020, we did have a couple of significant healthcare settlements related specifically to speaker programs. But, I think the why now is, thinking back to that timeline I put up, there have been several guidances, numerous settlements, very similar allegations or, similar buckets of allegations in those. So yes, the industry is aware of them, and yet in the OIG's view, they're still continuing. And so I think at that point, they issue the special fraud alert to say, look, and oftentimes these are issued in connection with industry enforcement. So the timing, in 2020 with other significant cases is not that surprising. But, I think the OIG gets to the point where they're like, look, we have had guidances, we have told you through enforcement, we've told you through CIAs, and this is still occurring. There's still tons of enforcement. I'm sure they have whistleblower cases sitting on their desks. And so we are going to put a special fraud alert out to the industry to say, like, look, this is the highest priority. This is, our highest level of warning to you, short of an enforcement action. So pay attention. So I think, it should be sending off alarm bells for companies to really pay attention and think about what the OIG is saying here with this alert.
Yeah, so I agree as well. And what's interesting too with respect to the timing of all this is, so the Novartis settlement, which of course is the recent one in 2020, which of course is, so large, it really stems from behavior from 2015, 2016. So they're just, and as Sarah said, companies are continuing to do this stuff. Look, commercial teams will push the edge of the envelope, and they will continue to push and push and push until they get slapped down and told that they can't do this anymore. And so I think, you always have this really difficult tug of war between your compliance teams and your commercial teams. And I think that's why we continue to see follow on, while everybody in the industry knew, we all know what we're supposed to do and what we're not supposed to do, although it's never really been truly codified, spelled out anywhere. But you have this, this push and pull between your commercial teams and your compliance teams constantly. And I think that this really went a long way in support of the compliance teams to help them. And it's really a useful tool. If you have a commercial team that's really out of line, you can show them that this fraud alert that requires a lot of attention, that, can't be just brushed off because of what it is, that the OIG has now come out with it and has said, hey, look, you guys need to really pay attention to it. So I think it's a super good tool in our arsenal as well.
Mm-hmm. I agree.
Thank you.
Okay.
So
flip to the next slide. We'll do another audience polling question. So this one is, has your company made any changes to its speaker programs in response to the fraud alert? So, yes, we've done a complete overhaul. Yes, a few changes. Not yet, but are considering or planning changes, and then no changes. So Leslie, while everyone's doing that, love to get your thoughts, from Amneal's perspective on how you guys are approaching this.
So thanks, Sarah. So we've been really lucky we, as I indicated earlier, have done a review of our speaker programs, and we're on target. We're within everything that the OIG has said that you need to do. So we're lucky in that we don't have to make any immediate changes, but we are thinking about certain process changes, while not required under the OIG guidance, might also help our teams a little bit more. And those really are focused on the independence of selection of the speakers. And that's one, while we do have independent selection, we really need to keep an eye on that. And I think that that's where, just in my opinion, that OIG will be looking at that very closely as well. Any thoughts from you, Sarah, what you're seeing?
Yeah, so, I think companies are considering changes, but at this point I would classify them, this is interesting, as, kind of smaller changes, focusing on low-hanging fruit rather than a complete overhaul. So we've seen companies think about things like, do they need to reduce their speaker caps? Do they need to reevaluate fair market value? Looking at meal limits, changing their alcohol policies, either eliminating alcohol or, limiting it to only, wine and beer and, capping it. So, no liquor. So I think there are, changes that are being considered. And as you said, process changes and other compliance infrastructure changes to make these safer. But I am not surprised that it is a 0% on this polling at complete overhaul. The 76% and not yet, but considering your planning changes, I think that is consistent. A lot of companies are like, okay, we understand the importance of the special fraud alert, but we don't yet know exactly what we want to do, how far we want to push it. We don't want to be an industry outlier, like all of those considerations, as well as just, internal politics of pushing through some of these changes.
So I think it's really interesting that there's 0% on a complete overhaul. And I think that's really consistent with the push-pull between compliance and commercial, and understanding that speaker programs do have a very valid purpose. As long as they're utilized correctly, they have a very valid purpose. They can be used well. It's just up to us as the compliance professionals to really make sure that we have our teams, our commercial teams, trained well on what they can and they can't do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, for those who are considering changes and really thinking through this, the fraud alert does list characteristics that it thinks are potentially suspect under the anti-kickback statute. And, this is definitely not an all-inclusive list, but I think it's, kind of the big buckets, big things to be thinking about and looking at. So it talks about things like sponsoring speaker programs with little or no educational information being presented. So making sure that, we have a bona fide education program and that the education program is actually conducted and that it's just not a meal and, social time. So the second circumstance on their list is providing alcohol or meals exceeding modest value. I still think that there is a challenge to the industry as to what constitutes modest. It's always been a tough area, kind of deciphering what modest means and what level the government is comfortable with, so that it doesn't kind of flip over into problematic under the anti-kickback statute. So I know companies are kind of evaluating this, whether their meal limits need to be reduced. And that's, another area that has come up, particularly with regard to COVID and some of the virtual programs going on, whether meals are going to be allowed. The third is holding programs at just inappropriate locations. So, whether it's expensive restaurants or at other places, venues where you can't have a valid exchange of educational information. Another category is sponsoring a large number of programs on the same topic And it goes hand in hand with number 5 on the list, which is significant time with no new medical or scientific information and no new FDA approvals. So these, I think, both go to how many programs are we having? Is there a bona fide need for that education? And if there isn't anything new to share, why are we continuing to have the programs? And getting comfortable with your business rationale for supporting the level of programs that you're having. 6 and 7 go to those buckets of inappropriate attendees, looking at, do we have attendees attending the same programs more than once? Do we have speakers attending? Or do we have other folks attending that do not have a legitimate business reason to be there? So digging into your attendee information becomes important there. And then 8 is, to Leslie, to your point about what Amneal is doing, looking at the sales and marketing business influence in the selection of speakers. And then it also goes on to say the company selects speakers or attendees based on past or expected revenue. So, I know most companies don't permit return on investment or ROI analyses with regard to speakers, but there are some companies who do ROI with regard to attendees. And based on this special fraud alert, I think that's an area of caution, whether that should continue to be done. But also taking a look at your business process. Do you allow sales and marketing influence into the selection of your speakers? And what is your process for selecting speakers? What criteria is used? The last one is paying more than fair market value for the speaking service. So, again, to the question that was posed, yes, we are aware of a lot of these from other actions, but the OIG, gave us a very nice and neat list here. So before we flip over, I think we have another polling question. Leslie, any of these characteristics that were surprising to you, or areas that you thought made sense to focus on when you saw the alert?
No, I mean, none of these surprised me. Actually, one of the areas, believe it or not, that really raised a lot of concern from our commercial teams was the no alcohol comment. So I'll tell you what Amneal does. And so we do allow alcohol, but we have a 2-drink maximum, and it's beer or wine only. So we'll continue with that. We believe that because there's an or in that language in the alert, that a modest amount of alcohol is fine. It's nothing too crazy. It's, not Opus 1 wine or, anything that's out of control. But a lot of people, enjoy wine with their meals, which is why we will allow it, but in a very limited fashion. Also, one of the things that we have done, and I think a lot of companies have done this as well to deal with the meal cost, is we have a particular meal cost cap that's allowed in most cities, but we do have certain exception cities that are defined in our meals policy where we allow a little bit of extra because just the cost of food is a lot more expensive, but that applies only to restaurant meals. So we've been really careful with what we allow now that we're living in a virtual world, making sure we stay in the lower limits. And quite candidly now, I mean, probably not more than Panera is what, that's about the level of food that is being provided these days for any of our speaker types of, arrangements.
Yeah. No, I think that's a good base level. So let's flip over to the next slide. We can launch this next polling question. So is your company auditing or evaluating data from past speaker programs in response to the special fraud alert? This list, are you taking a deeper dive into your data to figure out where you might have risk? So yes, we're doing a deep dive. The second one is yes, we're doing some analysis. No, we're not doing any analysis of past programs, and not sure. So Leslie, while they're filling that out, do you want to talk about Amneal and how you guys are approaching it?
Sure. So we are not doing a deep dive into past programs. As I indicated before, we are looking at our processes, and we have looked at them. and reviewed, determined that we're okay with respect to, what the factors that the OIG has deemed important. However, what we're doing is we're going to be starting a speaker program transactional monitoring in a much more detailed fashion that we haven't going forward, much more detailed fashion than we have in the past. We're going to be doing that going forward. So hopefully through a lot of this transactional monitoring, we will be able to determine whether, just to confirm that our organization is sticking to the guidelines that we've established.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, okay. So we've got 12% doing a deep dive, 35% doing some, 35% saying none, and 19% saying not sure. So I think that's right. What I'm seeing, the companies I'm talking to, there are some people who are just taking the special fraud alert and, focusing on going forward programs, adding in some additional auditing and monitoring, like you mentioned, Leslie. We are seeing some companies do some analysis, looking at particular areas that are highlighted, that in the special fraud alert, that list of 9, for example, attendees, the inappropriate attendees. If you don't have business rules around that, it isn't a current area of monitoring, it might be something that your company does kind of a deeper analysis on. So, I think this is pretty much in line with what I expected, some focusing on just going forward, but some doing some analysis to figure out if there are weak spots or other compliance controls and infrastructure that they can put into place going forward in response to the special fraud alert. Okay. So we're going to flip to the next one. Oh, we have another polling question. Okay. So in your opinion, what is the area of most risk to your company's speaker programs? So if you want to watch this poll, the first one is meals or alcohol. Second option is inappropriate program locations, the number of programs being conducted, the number of speakers in your bureau, and then this concept of the attendees, the repeat or inappropriate attendees. Leslie, I don't know if you have a thought on what area of risk you think is most challenging for companies right now.
Okay, thanks, Sarah. So right now, I see the number of programs being conducted as being particularly challenging. Why is this so? So in my experience, a company will have a single deck on a particular issue, and they'll try to leverage as much use of that deck as they can, and they'll do it through programs, repeat programs over and over and over again. So so that's why I think you need to really pay attention to how many programs are out there, because it's just in the natural course. It's, they have something, they want to use it, and they want to use it over and over and over again to leverage it. So that's where I think the big hot area is. The program locations, I do think that we talked about meals and alcohol, program locations. I think most people know that, you have to keep it modest, that it can't be at, any venues, these days that are not considered okay. And the repeat and inappropriate attendees. Repeat attendees can sometimes be a little bit of an issue, but inappropriate attendees, again, I think that companies, they get it. I think they know that, they can't have spouses and friends and other people attend these. And the number of speakers in bureau, you do need to, most speaker bureaus, most organizations use speaker bureaus, at least in my experience. And I think the speaker bureaus are pretty good at figuring out the appropriate number of attendees, but you do need to stay on top of that.
Yeah. I think the repeat and inappropriate attendees, I kind of agree with that analysis. If it, like I said, if it's an area that your company hasn't been focusing on, it can be a challenge. And oftentimes the results are kind of surprising as to how many times a particular doctor or someone may be attending a program. I think that, I agree with you, spouses, friends, those types of people, we all agree are not supposed to be there. We know that one well. I think it becomes more challenging when you get to different types of office staff and justifying whether they need to be present. But I do like the 19% meals and alcohol, because, as much as we have focused on meals and alcohol for speaker programs and making sure they're modest and all of those kind of pharma code and OIG requirements, it is low-hanging fruit for the DOJ in an enforcement action for a whistleblower, but it's also an area that's very easy to address. You can quickly put in different controls to kind of reduce that risk for the organization. So, I think this is a great representation of what we're hearing and seeing in the industry. So I think if we flip to the next slide, there's two other kind of key takeaways from this alert, in my opinion. One is, really emphasizing through the fraud alert that all forms of remuneration provided in connection with speaker programs need to be kind of assessed and monitored. So not only the remuneration to speakers, but also the meals and alcohol that's provided to the attendees. And I just also want to mention, footnote 2 in the fraud alert. It references speaker training and specifically remuneration paid to healthcare professionals for speaker training. So I don't want that one to get lost. I think it is worth paying attention to that footnote and ensuring that you are looking at all forms of remuneration. The other one that was not specifically called out, but I think is worth mentioning as well, is any travel associated with speaker programs, and really ensuring that it's necessary travel and that there's a business rationale for that travel. The other kind of key takeaway from this fraud alert is the fact that the risk for speaker programs is not only on the life sciences side, and I think lots of life sciences companies, we get it. We've had the OIG compliance guidance. We've had the pharma code for years and years. We've had those enforcement actions, so we understand and we know that this is an area that compliance should focus on. But also the impact to healthcare professionals, not only the healthcare professionals who are paid to be speakers, but also the healthcare professionals that attend these programs, and understanding that all of that remuneration, the payments, and the transfers of value could potentially implicate the healthcare professionals individually as well. So if we want to flip to the next slide, I think we have one more polling question.
So since we have 13 minutes left, what I would recommend is we skip over the polling questions, because we want to cover I think there's enough content, and I'm sure there's going to be some questions in the end. So I think there's 3 more polling questions, but let's go over them so that we can cover the key parts of the presentation.
Okay. So, I wanted to also highlight kind of that last section of the fraud alert. I think it would be unfair to not cover that section of the fraud alert in this presentation. And that's the section that really talks about in-person versus virtual programs. And the OIG kind of highlights that there's a decreased number of in-person programs right now because of the pandemic, and challenges the companies, the industry, to think about whether they are going to resume in-person speaker programs or increase remuneration paid to healthcare professionals when in-person speaker programs are resumed. And I think it's a challenge to the industry to say, look, is there a bona fide need for in-person speaker programs? And if so, prove that in-person need, that bona fide educational need to us. So Leslie, I don't know if you have any thoughts on this particular one, or thoughts on why the OIG threw it in. But I think it'd be unfair to not mention it in this presentation.
So thanks, Sarah. I think that the OIG threw this in as a bone to pharmaceutical companies, basically saying, or bone to life sciences companies, basically saying, they put out this, they started the alert by saying, we don't think it's a good idea unless there's truly an educational component, and we really question the educational value of these programs. And they go through all of the reasons, and we've been discussing them. But I think they put this out there to say, look, most of you are doing virtual programs now, and they're seeming to work. So why don't you stick with them? Because there's less of these, concerns that we're seeing. There's less of these concerns that we've talked about. You're not going to run into a lot of these issues. And so I think, that's what they're trying to say here. I think that a company can still get by with a good mix. When we go back to, an opened up, more normal world, I think it's the virtual model, I think is a great model. And I would, recommend that companies continue to leverage that. However, there is value to the in-person relationship and discussions. And I think that companies can combine that as well, as long as it's done right.
Great. So, yeah, Mohammed, I think the next two slides were pulled. So if we want to skip over those, and then we can go to utilizing monitoring technology.
Okay, thank you, Sarah. So I think we're in the last stretch of this webinar. So if there's any questions or comments, please do ask. We'll try to leave some time there. So in the interest of just, what can we do when we're faced with a fraud alert and moving forward? And I know a lot of folks in the industry are using some sort of monitoring technology, not just around the data, but also live monitoring of these events. What are some of the quick ways that we can use technology to get a foothold on the alert, right? And I've thought of a few ways that might be helpful for this audience. So the first one is, when we look at what OIG is saying, is that we're selecting, or one of the risks is selecting high prescribing HCPs to be speakers and rewarding them with lucrative speaker deals, right? How do we, of course, we can try to nail this on the front end of the process where commercial teams are not engaged in the selection of the speakers. But once, how do we look back when we're going through, how do we monitor? One of the ways you can really do that is you can plot each of your physicians that you have contracts with, and plot them on two axes, right? On one side, you put the amount that you spend, and on the other side, the prescriptions that you write. And I know this is going to be because this is such a big no-no for commercial teams, and starts to get to the point of crossing the line in ROI. We've seen a lot of compliance teams also be very reluctant to go through with this analysis, even though OIG and DOJ and in repeated cases, this data, just the public data around prescriptions and spend, has been analyzed many times. So if external organizations, government and private, can analyze it, it's only fair for compliance teams to have an inside look a lot earlier and be proactive. And what this does is, once you plot this, it gives you a very narrow band or very small percentage of HCPs that really create a risk, and that's what you should then be more focused towards, knowing compliance teams as such have limited resources to really look at those specific physicians in more detail in terms of their selection, in terms of their contracts and payments. Sarah, did you want to add something to this one?
Yeah, so I liked your warning, and I'm not surprised at all that there are compliance professionals who have concern about this one. I do agree with you that there's potential value in this type of monitoring, but I also agree that it should be done with caution, being thoughtful about making sure it doesn't cross over into ROI, certainly keeping the results out of the hands of commercial, considering whether to do a review like this under privilege to further protect it, just making sure that there's some thought given before you dive into this type of analysis, but there can be value to it.
Okay, great. And I'll move to the next couple of ways that we can utilize technology. So one of the things that came up was around hosting speaker programs at entertainment venues, or during recreational events, or anything that we would consider as inappropriate from a venue perspective. And I know when we did the polling question, 0% votes came out for this being a big issue or a challenge or a big risk. But one of the ways we can start to use technology to really essentially highlight speaker programs that might have been held in an inappropriate venue. And there's a variety of ways you can do text searches around your receipts that come in, whether through its Concur or whatever your T&E mechanism or your speaker bureau mechanism. While you will, on the front end, you can articulate what venues you consider appropriate in your policy document, and also train your speaker bureau vendor to make sure that those things are followed. When it comes to monitoring for execution, you can utilize technology to search for maybe venue names or pattern names that might allow you to at least highlight the ones that you think are inappropriate. And I'll cover the last quick way to really use technology. And we've seen a couple of areas where repeat attendees and inappropriate attendees have come up, attendees that are not HCP or related to the HCP. One of the ways you can really do this is analyzing for repeat attendees through data is relatively an easy mechanism, right? You can, and I remember in the Novartis settlement, there was a case where they looked at repeat attendees in sort of this 12-month floating window, right? So it wasn't just like looking at it in a year, but it was like, when did they attend? When did that attendee attend? And did they have any attendance in the 12 months prior? So it was kind of this rolling timeline. So it's really important to not just look at it from an annual or 6 months or a quarterly basis, but also think about how you can leverage technology to look at whenever an attendee comes in, you're able to look at 12 months prior from a rolling window. And the other way to look for non-HCP attendees, at least to highlight the speaker programs where there may be a higher ratio of non-HCP attendees, you can do a quick ratio of I guess business guests versus HCPs directly from your Concur extract, and that can give you at least those programs that have a high ratio of non-HCP attendees. And then further, you can drill in to do some additional analysis on whether those programs and those attendees were legitimate. So a couple of quick ways to really leverage technologies to give you I guess a good handle on the repeat attendees area as well. Sarah or Leslie, anything you'd like to add here?
I think these are really good suggestions, and I think it's a very good, it's low-hanging fruit in order for companies to be able to see what's going on. And I'd always recommend that compliance do that, whether under privilege or not. As Sarah said, completely separate from the commercial teams, and the specific data is not shared with the commercial teams, just to keep it clean and keep any concerns of other types of utilization away.
Okay, and since we're in the last couple of minutes, I'll let you summarize your response, Leslie, and ask Sarah to provide some key takeaways, and then we'll take, I think there's 3 questions, we'll want to take that as well.
Sure. So, our takeaways are just a transactional review. Make sure that you're doing what you need to be doing correctly. The big things you want to focus on are your meal spend, your FMV. Make sure that you're paying in accordance with FMV, and there's a good FMV rate card established. And, make sure that you've got, a good solid BNA process that will lay everything out for you. And that will, if you review that well, you'll see everything you need, in your transactional review. You want to interface with your speaker bureau to ensure independence of speaker selection, and train them again. Make sure you're constant. Tell them what you're going to tell them, and tell them what you told them, and do it again 5 different times, and then again 5 more times, and eventually it'll start to become part of what everybody does. And that's the amnial response: train, and train again, and they're getting used to it now. So and they've been really great. And responsive, and we've found that our commercial teams are tremendously responsive. If they understand why they need to do something, and you can make it work within their solution of what they're trying to accomplish, they'll work with you to get there. So I've found that to be very helpful.
Thank you.
So
Thank
Sarah,
you.
sure.
Okay, Sarah.
Okay. I think these key takeaways we have talked about, really evaluating and thinking about the key risk areas and ways that we can address them to, whether it's through process changes or policy changes, to minimize the risk to your organization. I think the other key takeaway, this last one, is stay tuned for upcoming enforcement in CIAs. I think those will really demonstrate how the DOJ and the OIG is thinking about speaker programs and approaching them post special fraud alert. I think it will also give us some real insight into whether the Novartis CIA, which has some very stringent requirements related to speaker programs, whether those are in fact going to become some sort of industry trend or expectation, or if those are, as some people hope, a one-off type of CIA. So I think that, is going to play out sooner rather than later. And so I think, staying on top of those enforcement actions to see what happens after this is going to be really important for the industry.
Okay, and I know we're over time, but I'd like you, if you both can stay, to answer a couple of questions, and audience members, if you can stay for another 5 minutes. For those of you that need to leave, of course you can, but I'll at least take the 3 questions that have come in. So the first one that has come in is, does the existence of a fraud alert now provide greater enforceability for the OIG? Does it alter the consequences?
So I don't think it's necessarily going to alter any obligations. At the end of the day, they still have to prove intent in all the other requirements under the anti-kickback statute, if there is going to be a case, either a criminal or civil case. So I think the fraud alert more just puts the industry on notice as to how the DOJ and the OIG think about speaker programs, and how are they going to be analyzing speaker programs going forward.
Okay, the next question is, what's the best way to ensure commercial teams and their leadership can be appraised of their speaker program compliance? I think that may be more relevant for you, Leslie.
I'm sorry, can you repeat that question?
Yeah, so the question is, what's the best way to ensure commercial teams and their leadership can be kept appraised of their speaker program compliance?
I think that's very easy. I think you don't have to give the teams the specific data you find from your analysis, but you can certainly have a sit down and talk to them the trends that you're seeing, and come fully armed with solutions to help them accomplish their goals. Because one of the things that I found is you can't just come to a commercial team and say you have to do X, Y, and Z, because you're not going to get anywhere. But if you come to them and say, we understand you want to do X, Y, and Z, but here's the issues that we're dealing with. How about if we do, X minus 1 or Z plus 3, and we can get you to where you need to go. And, all of that without sharing the grit and the granularity of the details, I think you can do well with it.
Okay, and just last question, I think this might be for you, Sarah. How would a company defend using in-person rather than online once in-person becomes permitted? This is to ask, what is the rational business for an in-person versus online? What is the business rationale, I guess, is the ask here for speaker programs.
That is the golden question, right? I don't know crystal ball for that one. But, as companies, look to transition back to in-person programs, maybe later this year, at some point this year, hopefully, thinking through whether that is the best option in light of this special fraud alert, or if the OIG is pushing you in a different direction. And if you are going to go in that direction, making sure that you have a very solid business rationale to support it, so that if that subpoena or CIA does arrive someday, you have that as your defense or in support of your position, because it will be critical. But I think that is going to be a challenge for the industry to really think through and have a solid business rationale to support it.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you so much, Sarah and Leslie. So audience, we're going to close this out. I have on screen and the next series of webinars that we're hosting around open payments reporting. These are going to be scheduled and run as open Q&A. So if you have, or if your team members have questions and need answers or just want to talk, we'll have these open lines available and register. So once again, thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Leslie. I think it was a great walkthrough of the alert and some key takeaways of what our audience can do once they go back into the business. And we weren't able to cover all the polling questions, but I think we got enough where we know where the industry is from a perspective today. So thank you, everyone, and we'll close this out and make the recording available for everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.